Hi, Peter Boyles, of course, one-time morning talk show host at 710 KNUS and surviving for decades in the media business here in the Front Range. But I retired. Now it's been, I guess this is the beginning of the 5th week or the end of the 6th week. I lost track, but I spend more time reading, and luckily I've been able to have this YouTube show called The Shoot, and I want to thank everybody at Salem that allows this, and of course the one, the only Mark Crowley. Welcoming back, and James Kirby Martin was with us before, and I absolutely love, great historian, American historian, fell in love with him, and he said he has a book about, it was about Dresden, the bombing of Dresden, and I don't know how, Professor, we got into talking about Dresden, and then you said to me, well, I've done a book on Dresden, and you sent me the book, and we'll show the cover, and I told you before we began, I didn't put the book down. Congratulations. Thank you, and welcome back to The Shoot.
Thank you.
Yeah. The idea of being able to do this, and I don't know where we were, what we were talking about, to trigger Dresden, and Dresden is always, and you said to me, I think I was recalling this, that the pressure of bombing Dresden, and there was no need to bomb Dresden, and I remember you saying to me, well, really, Dresden really was a target, and then what you do in this book that's so wonderful, go to Stalin, and the pressure Stalin puts on, where are the big three when this begins? I turn it over to you, please.
Yes. Well, it's a very complicated story, and there was actually a plan floating around in 1944 among the Allies, and Stalin would have been this called Thunderclap. The idea was to bomb certain cities in the east to open the corridor from a variety of points of view to taking out Berlin, the capital. You take the capital, it's going to finish off Hitler's regime, which does indeed happen, and that's part of it. And so Stalin is involved in this story, not necessarily that directly, but at the Yalta Conference, which occurred in early February of 1945, the Allies there, the big three, are not only dividing up territory, the future of Poland, the future of this, the future of that, but they're also talking war strategy. How can we finally break the back of the Nazi regime? And one of the approaches would be to, let's identify a group of cities that, if we really wipe them out, would be the beginning of the end. This goes back to the old matter of trying to break the enemy's will. And how do you break a will of a person like Adolf Hitler, who just never did? I mean, the only thing that finally finished him was the acceptance of total defeat, and then he blew his brains out, and that stopped the problem, or ended the problem, I guess I should say. So that's part of it. And the question then is, Dresden, now it's being treated, and in many literatures, this was not really a legitimate target. This was a cultural city, the Florence on the Elbe River, had art exhibits, it had beautiful palaces, it had an opera house, it had all sorts of things that simply spoke of culture. So why would you go ahead and bomb a city like this? It's like the innocent target. Well, when you really begin to look at the evidence, the target is not that innocent from at least 2 points of view, and perhaps others, one of which is there's a lot of manufacturing, war manufacturing, more or less going underground. It's going on, let me state it specifically, it's going on underground. And that our characters will be involved in that. That's one of the points I should make. A second is, it's a major rail center. And railroads are a key to defense, especially in 1945. There's this old concept of interior lines in the military, and that is, you're getting beat over here, and then, okay, we're going to back up over here, and then we'll move troops interiorly to another location where we're getting hit hard, which keep trying to balance back and forth to hold off the enemy. And the enemy is coming in from east to west. Russians obviously are the focal point of that, and then you've right at the time of the ending of the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler has to do some withdrawing. That campaign, one of the last major campaigns, is a failure, and so he's also moving troops. Well, Dresden is that rail center, and that can be a point at which you can attack. And if you can wipe out the railroads in that area, the train station, so on and so forth along that line, that also helps to explain what is going on, because then it won't be so easy to move troops, let's say, away from the Allies in the West to the Russians or other allies in the East. And so that's what's involved. And it's known that this is not an innocent city. And the planners are of the persuasion at this point in time, we're almost desperate. We're in a situation of virtual total war. How are we going to stop this madman Hitler, who's now riled up his population again and again and again? And the more you pound them, the more he convinces the people they must continue. Yeah. And you're bombing everything to oblivion. You're killing lots of innocent people, but Hitler doesn't care, because he's a madman. He's a power-hungry individual, and his dream is, we're going to build this magnificent Lebensraum, that is, we're going to spread all over Europe into Asia. We'll have this great Aryan nation, and that's what this should all be about, is sort of, in his perverted mind, a savior of humanity. And how do you stop? The way you stop it is to take him out. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen, even though he helps along the way on April 30th of 1945.
I often think of this madness, and I think of Hirohito, and I think of Tojo, yes. And then you think of a not so much a Hermann Goering character, but a Joseph Goebbels character, yes. And Adolf Hitler. And fanaticism is frightening. And even in the end, where Okinawa is now occupied, and it's you can see the end, they can't see it. And the American military, the British American military, are closing in on the Rhine, and the Bulge is gone, and the Red Army is inside of Germany, and they're still saying, we're going to win.
That's right. And
can you compare and contrast, like one of those easy questions that are very difficult to answer? Compare and contrast the mindset of the Japanese versus the National Socialist.
It is in many ways a fascinating comparison when you consider what is going on in Japan. There's this sense that we will do anything, we will give up our lives for the emperor, because the emperor is God. Right. Hitler hasn't quite gotten to God status, although he thinks along those lines. Hasn't necessarily sold that to the German people, but he sells himself as a savior in the sense he's going to save them from this awful Jewish problem that they think they have, that he's going to restore the economy to its once great glory, and the economy had been in terrible shape during the 1930s. And those are the kinds of things. So he's not, but he really becomes godlike in his own mind, that he can do no wrong. And somehow he is able to convince the population that they must continue to fight. They must not allow their will to be broken, or they'll lose everything, even though they are losing. That's irony. They're losing everything, but they still are convinced. And you mentioned Goebbels, the great propaganda chief. He plays a very important role in the story of Dresden, which we don't really necessarily go into in the book. But Goebbels is responsible for a lot of the post-Dresden numbers that appear, which is a very important part of the subject, because how many were actually killed because of the bombing in Dresden, all those raids that occurred on the 13th of February into the 14th? Well, the actual number that's accepted today is in the 18 to 25,000 range. But Goebbels came out immediately in two forms of propaganda, one of which made an effort to pile up all the bodies they could find and take a picture and say, look what they're doing. Look what these allies are doing. They're just killing all these innocent civilians. Well, a lot of these innocent civilians were actually involved in wartime activity, in the sense of they were civilians who were helping to make war goods. And but the second point he made up a number. This is one thing we should always be aware of. And that is, his number was somewhere between, as I remember, 200 and 208,000. Well, that's not close to the real number, but that's a number that sells. In fact, that's even a number that's sold into the literature about Dresden after the war in very interesting ways because you pitch a number of 100 to 150 to 200,000, and what you actually come up with is a number that's higher than the bombing of the Japanese cities. And so you can argue that Dresden was worse than bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki in terms of the actual numbers. And then that's also builds the story about the cruelty of wiping out this quote unquote innocent city. So that's all part of the complex process. But in many ways, the Japanese are not going to give up no matter what, unless
even after the second bomb.
That's right. That's right. Until the invasion finally comes. I mean, the fanaticism that in the mind is beyond our comprehension, my comprehension, most folks' comprehension.
Now, I didn't realize, and I read LeMay, that even after the Nagasaki bomb, they were, and so apparently there was a third bomb, or at least I read there was a third bomb, but it was in Utah, in Wendover, I think, wherever it was. LeMay said send a third bomb.
Right. They were. My understanding is they're getting ready, if they still haven't gotten the message of how they can be obliterated, then we'll have to keep going because, I always think of the Patton line from the movie, the opening scene, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it down specifically, but he says the idea is not for you to get killed. The idea is, in war, is for you to kill the other people. That's how you're going to win the war. And it really gets down to that kind of, it's simplicity. It is simplicity that is also rich in an obvious reality, if I could put it that way. And so breaking the will ultimately will occur in Japan. The will in Germany, I believe, is finally broken because the Allies have basically overwhelmed the crunch into Berlin and the taking of other key cities. And in a small way, Dresden fits into that pattern.
When it was announced that Hitler was dead, and they said he died fighting in Berlin, but that he was dead.
Yes.
And that, from my reading and listening, that moment, or when Hirohito goes on radio, those seem to be these moments where, okay. But if they, I don't know, this is the great ponderance of history, is these guys, and I'm a Leni Riefenstahl, Triumph for the Will. I mean, Adolf Hitler's a Christ-like figure coming. He's in the sky. He's coming to save them. And they buy in. I mean, I'm watching that in modern politics in this country today. One man will save us all, and that's pretty scary.
Yes.
But again, the other part of it too, and this goes back to Campbell, your Lancaster pilot, in this great book, Surviving Dresden, that the more that the bombing, the more the Blitz took place, the stronger the will of the English people, the British people, to stand up. And we know now, bombing Hanoi, B-52 raids, the so-called Rolling Thunder raids, it just strengthened the will of host people to fight. So I don't know, in that final moment when Hirohito comes on the radio, and they'd never even heard his voice before, had they?
I can't say for sure, but it was highly unusual for that to actually happen, where he would speak up and say, "Folks,
it's over.
It's working." I don't think he said "folks," but it's over. We just have to accept we have been defeated.
But had he not said that, there would have been a third bomb.
It could well have been.
Yeah,
and so it would have also, eventually, if they still wouldn't, you'd have to totally destroy their civilization, rather than bomb two cities and take a terrible death toll.
I ask you this, there's a woman, actually you begin the book, and this is what I love about how you write, the real stuff about Adolf Hitler and his niece. You open the book and I'm thinking, you caught me there. Right. And talk about, because people don't know, I mean, Adolf Hitler is a sexually pretty twisted character.
Yes, and we tried to tone that down a little bit because
Yeah,
twisting is definitely, or twisted is the correct term.
yeah.
Kelly Raubel is a half niece. She is a daughter of Hitler's half. I hope I'm saying this correctly.
Oh,
Half sister.
yeah.
And anyway, she becomes sort of a consort, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
Young girl, 1920, something like that. And she lives with Hitler in Munich. And they do have a relationship, a sexual relationship.
Hmm.
Um, and Hitler is this control freak type of guy. And this is one way to point that out without stating it, without the obvious. The historian would say, he was control freak. We don't say it that way.
No.
He's got to control this woman, even though she is really now trying to get away from him. He so dominates her that she can't really live her own life. And they get in a big argument. And then, according to the official record, she committed suicide with his
Yeah.
gun.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to believe that, but we tell the
Yeah.
other story, which is also very possible that in the struggle, he may have pulled the trigger because of the angle of the shot and everything like that, and that he actually murdered her.
Mhm.
And that this goes to various messages, and I hope that it was understood on this level. One of which is Hitler has to control everything around him, or he will do what? He will ultimately destroy it. Go to February and March and April of 1945, and that's kind of it's like a metaphor for
Thank
what's
you.
going to happen, a clue
Thank you.
for the future
Thank you.
without
Yeah.
without stating it.
Yeah.
And then also, it's really that he will crush anyone who stands in his way. He's on a power drive at this point in time in the early 1930s. He's about to become chancellor. She's become sort of an embarrassment to him. They make up the whole story about how she was going to be an opera singer. She really didn't have the voice, and that she was upset because she realized her lack of a talent. So she really committed suicide, if you want to believe all of this stuff. But in reality, it has a lot to do with she's standing in the way of his own ambition. And that ambition is going to lead to the 50 million deaths over the war that bring us to the next story. And we talk then about liberation. And then we talk about what we try to move the subject into the concentration camps, because the concentration camps will become very important in the story with our main female character, who is actually based. That story is based on a real person, and so that's what we're really trying to do. We're hopefully setting a tone in a way that people will want to keep turning the pages. Well, wait a minute, what's going to happen next? Where's this?
And you did that
Where's
as a reader, and I'm drawn to that period of history. You just captured me. I got the book signed, and I appreciate it. Goes into the library after we're done. But and you do what so many others do as well. Who is this guy? And even today, new books appear, and yours is a good example of this madman. This, he's there. And one of the things I get angry about is not, I shouldn't say angry, but oftentimes in politics, modern politics, somebody gets called Hitler, or he's hit. I go, no, we should have this rule that says you can't call anybody Hitler. And
That's right. I agree with that.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Most of it's silly. Most of it's silly. They don't even know what they're saying.
I say that all the time. You've never read Karl Marx, and
Right. These are gratuitous or
Yeah.
comments, I guess is a way to put it. Or
Yeah.
but I agree, and it really is kind of a silly form of discourse because all you're doing is you're just sort
Making it better for him.
ad hominem kind of stuff. Like I don't have a good argument, so I'll just call you Hitler.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really what it boils down to in so many cases. When in reality, I'm suspicious that many of the people that throw around these kinds of terms,
Both of us.
they don't know anything about Hitler.
Thank you. I absolutely, totally agree, and I'm no expert, but I know enough to know there are things you just can't say, you should not say historically, and that's certainly one of them. So you have this incredible British Lancaster captain who has lost his wife and his son
Right.
in the Blitz,
Right.
and he's flying missions, and he is incredibly brave. Did you look for him in history to find him, to talk about him, or is he just many men?
Well, I would put him in the many men category,
Yeah.
but he is based. What I did when I really started to think about and develop the story, which by the way was based on a overnight business to Dresden a few years ago, and a tour guide who said to us that because this Dresden was in East Germany, and she sort of said she'd been a member of the Communist Party and that sort of thing. And she went on to say that there was no reason to bomb this city. It was an innocent city. She gave all that standard spiel. And I kind of knew better than that. And I just started reading. And one of the things I did, I started consuming, and there are lots of wartime, let me rephrase that, memoirs about individuals who fought in the war. And I looked at a number of these kinds of memoirs of individuals who had flown in the war. And again, it's a very rich literature and very informative. And I found one individual that sort of stood out because he had flown some missions, and he had grown increasingly disillusioned. All I'm doing is killing people on the ground. This is going nowhere. It's bothering me. Why didn't we? And it's reflective. Why didn't we just sit down with Adolf Hitler in 1943 and call this whole thing off?
Yeah.
All right. Now that presents the dilemma. Adolf Hitler wasn't going to sit down with anybody in 1943. This is a pipe dream on the part of this person writing the memoir, because he's feeling his guilt about, I kept being involved in all this killing that is going on, and he doesn't put it in a perspective of saying, which is one of our themes in the book, how do you stop the killing when the killing won't stop, which is a perennial problem in war. In fact, we've got that going on right now in the Ukraine.
Absolutely.
But so that's a real dilemma. Now here you have Wallace Campbell is a manufactured name, Lancaster pilot, and the big bomber. I guess I should say
the heavy
bomber. I mean, very fine war machine. You have the problem of how do we get at the Germans when we aren't in a position to really get at them, because how are you going to? I mean, we're not in June of 1944 yet, where you can just sort of force a force into France, that sort of thing. So you really have this kind of defensive perimeter issue. How are you going to get beyond Hitler's defensive perimeter, which is on the coast? And so you fly over it. And that's why this bombing story becomes so important, I think sometimes really underappreciated, because we do concentrate so much on ground forces in the way we will talk about the war. So guys like Campbell, they're flying over and they're dying by the dozens, by the thousands. In the end, I don't remember the exact number, but it's over 100,000, something like that, because they're flying in a coffin for all practical purposes. The German defensive armor is very, very effective, blowing these planes out of the sky, being attacked by the Luftwaffe or whatever it might be. And the average Lancaster carried a crew of seven, including our Lancaster, obviously, and they get hit, they're dead. In most cases, they're just going to be blown out of the sky. So it's a very, very risky situation. And what begins to bother Campbell is this whole dilemma. I'm not afraid to die. And he's lost his family in early blitzing activity, much earlier in the wars. It's getting started back in 40 and 41. But he's saying, I don't care. I'm not really worried if I die, but I'm really responsible for this crew, and I don't want the crew to die. But at the same time, I think we've got to find a way to stop the killing. And I'm having second thoughts, and I don't want to be on these missions anymore. Well, then it's an AWOL kind of a problem that will develop and will be explored in the book. And I won't give it away, but everything works itself out in the end.
But I thought, this guy is like so many men and women of what Brokaw called the greatest generation.
Yes.
And there's no question in my mind
that's
who they were.
That's right.
Now you have this young man who gets drafted. He grows up in Dresden. He's in high school with this young Jewish woman, or half Jewish woman, that he loves from afar. And a Soviet sniper takes his arm off. Yep. Now he's assigned as a guard inside of this. How did you come up with this? I mean, I'm an amateur writer, and I'm looking at you. How'd you pull this one off?
Well, let me explain. Of all of our characters, he may be the most made up. What I really wanted, what Bob and I really wanted to do, we wanted to find a Wehrmacht, a man in the military who didn't really want to be in the military, as many thousands and hundreds of thousands of Germans didn't want. He's drafted in. He's a young man, comes from a good family, and what we had to do, we decided we needed to introduce for lack of a better term, a suffering German, somebody who really did suffer, didn't want to be part of this. Not everybody's a Nazi, and that the character Gruber is our super Nazi, is the guard.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. But in this case, Albert is not, and he is out campaigning in the east, going up against the Russians. He gets caught up in some local firefight and gets his arm shattered by a shot by a Russian, and so he's on home duty. But he hasn't. But he also represents that sort of everybody's involved in this war in one way or another. I mean, it's really, how do you explain? Even the civilians, like someone like Gisela, our main female character, she is helping the war cause by manufacturing parts of the bomb. As we try to make it vague but clear, that's what she's involved in, and so on and so forth. So I don't know whether I actually can identify. I mean, with Campbell, I gave you an example. With Gisela, there's another example, but with Albert,
she's a real woman. I mean, she's your historically real person. Yeah,
and she's a person who is trapped. Yeah. She's trapped. Here she is. Her mother is Jewish. Her father's a Lutheran. So we would call, in Hitler's era, we would say she is half Jewish.
Yeah, that's enough.
That is what is saving her, because the final solution. There are certain exceptions, even those exceptions are going away by 1945, which would affect her. But she's in a big trap, and she's got to get out. And that's part of what the story will be all about. How will she break out of that trap? And Albert becomes the answer for her. Not because she loved him, but because she wanted as best she could. He was a high school friend, and he seems to have the ability to provide a means for she or her younger brother, just to further complicate the story, to get out. And that's part of the novelization of the story. Although these are real situations. They're all, you can imagine them all. They're not totally made up.
I was thinking last night, knowing I was going to be with you today and how much I love your work and how bright you are, and I think, well, this isn't one of those books like, we know the ending. I don't want to screw the ending up for people watching. I want them to read your book. So
I'm not going to that. We'll put that aside.
Yeah, put that aside over here, how it ends. But it was an emotional ending. And I've talked to my circle of friends that you got to read this guy. And in the end, as they always say, and it's very emotional, and you're brilliant. When I sit with someone like you, and there's so many questions I have, that time period that begins, as most modern historians say, World War I, World War II, the same war. It was just an unfinished and had to be finished. Right. And you mentioned, if I can pull you away, you mentioned Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine. As a reader of history, everything that happens in Barbarossa invasion of the Ukrainians go along for the ride and all this. I'm going to bring you to modern moments. How do you dope this out, Jim? How do you see this? Because, the part of it, they were fighting in a steel mill. And I'm thinking, that's Stalingrad. Where on one end, they're trying to make tanks. On the other end, they're fighting the German army in a steel mill. I mean, we just went through this. They evacuated a steel mill. And I'm thinking, my God, we're doing it again. Do you have a sense on how this ends in Ukraine?
I mean, that is the major question. Given everything that's happened so far, I suppose the biggest surprise from my point of view is there wasn't a sudden military victory.
Yeah.
That's what everybody expected to happen. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly, even in American planning, we assumed that Putin was going to win this thing fast and easily, and that it hasn't happened. And that puts us in kind of in many ways, much more. I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way. Much more dangerous situation. That
I
might have
agree.
that might have been the simple ending, not desirable. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
But I've got to go to Hitler
Me too.
to
I
say
did this again.
maybe
Yeah.
the answer is
Yeah.
that we have to deal with the dictator in this situation who has many Hitler-like characteristics, and there are many analogies that can be drawn between the
You're
two.
talking about Putin now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean Hitler. I meant
No, no.
Putin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you stop him? Now, one of the interesting things is like Mary. I don't say it very well. Mary Popol or Mary
Yeah.
Popol is that resistance at the steel plant is a signal that he's in real trouble.
Yeah, I agree.
Because even if he kills all those people, they're not going to kill everybody in that situation, short of what we all have to fear, atomic warfare. We
Well,
have to, and then that's hovering. But on May 9th, which is the big victory day,
Yeah.
in many ways, Putin backed off in his words. He didn't
Yeah.
go to a next level of threats, even though he used those at various times. He sort of leveled it off. And I'm wondering whether the way to get out of this really is you're going to have to concede him, which I hate to do, would hate to recommend. I'm not recommending this, but you give him part of the eastern Ukraine,
We
and you work it out in negotiation, either that or the turnover in Russia. And I see those as kind of the two alternatives at this point.
I, for the life of me, I keep thinking this is all repetitious. I read about Chechnya and Putin in Chechnya, and I mean, and then so we're talking about these other characters: Stalin, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Hirohito, Mussolini. You go down a list of people. Of course, who is Putin most like out of this moment where giants walk the earth? Who do you parallel him up most with? Historical character.
I would say I see a lot of Stalin in him,
I do too.
and that goes. Let me go back and do during World War II. Stalin. Let's take the case of Chechnya. Chechens were sort of aligning themselves with the Germans. What did Stalin do? He went in and he just forced a mass migration, forced these people out of Chechnya out on the plains of Asia somewhere. Hundreds and thousands of them die. All that bitterness will build up and will also play a role in the First and Second Chechen Wars. And I can see that's in a certain way. It's sort of like with Putin, and that is Stalin is building this great empire, and he doesn't want resistance to it, and he has to take the Germans out. And in his own way, that's what Putin is doing. He's going back to trying to rebuild this massive Soviet empire, and I think he sort of tested things out, especially in the Second Chechen War, which began in about 2000 and lasted for 8 or 9 years. It was not a great success story in terms of all the killing that went on. But ultimately, Putin won, whereas Boris Yeltsin lost the first war.
Yes.
So I mean, and then you have other incidents and other wars and small wars, and then he says, "I'm going to continue that process." And I'm not going to necessarily move people out onto the plains of Asia. I'm just going to take them and bring them back into this empire where they rightfully belong. So he's an expansionist, if we could come up with that kind of a word. I'm not saying that Hitler wasn't an expansionist. Good Lord, let's think Lebensraum and the great Aryan nation out there. But Stalin, I would just put my money on him, but it's a hard call. It is. I can think Hitler
and how much and Ukrainians the whole history of Ukraine that goes back before the Romanovs and these people, and what Stalin and what they do to Ukrainians, what Ukrainians do back. I have read that even after the Red Army comes back through, there's Ukrainian resistance now fighting the Red Army into 46.
Yes.
I mean, and I think that's overlooked by, again, the people you call, they discount these people, they don't know what they're talking about. But this is an age-old dislike from both sides. And they were saying, I was watching some newscast the other night, and they say, well, the Russians who live in Ukraine, no, Stalin put Russians in Ukraine after they purged the kulaks, and they needed to have a population, so true Ukrainians are dead or starved to death or whatever they've done. So Joe just moves, you know, indigenous Russians in. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
They're not there because of intermarriage or, gee, let's go to Ukraine, honey.
Right. That's right.
And that's that age-old stuff that makes guys like you so worthwhile. I don't know.
What is so amazing is that part of the world, or that part of Europe and touching into Asia, gets run over back and forth, back and forth. Just throw in Poland with Ukraine, and it's an incredible story that, you know, the Poles are getting beat up by both sides.
Absolutely.
I mean, and then you take the Jewish community amidst all of this, and they are being super beat up.
By both.
By both sides.
By both.
And transplanting populations and moving people around. Yeah. And a lot of it, in so many ways, goes to this fascination with, if I control X amount of territory, I have then established myself, for lack of a better term, as a human god. And I'm drawn into. I don't even know what to say at a certain time when you think about it. The catastrophe, in so many ways, it has been a portion of the human.
I'm reading Serbs and Croats. Another example: Ukrainians and Russians.
That's right. That's a
Serbs
hard
and Croats.
Oh
man,
challenge.
Man.
And the other thing, for me personally, I hate to admit, but I was born during World War II.
Yeah, we both were.
Fought in World War II.
Yeah.
And so you sort of have that connection, because that's going to be an experience that's there with you, with the old uniforms in the closet and mothballs and all that sort of thing. Yeah. And I think that's part of my own interest and fascination, what these people went through, and were willing to go through, just to save themselves and to save the lives and to try to save nations and their beliefs. Yeah. And from my point of view, we were obviously on the right side, even though that's even being questioned today.
Now, yes. And you know, Putin's grandma dies in the siege of Leningrad. I think diphtheria, kills her, and his father's horribly wounded, and uncles that disappear, they never see them again. They're with Georgy Zhukov, and he's raised, he knows this stuff.
Right.
And
one of the interesting things, I read an article recently based on what Putin said. He didn't really think that badly of the Germans. And this was an article about 10 or 12
He lived there.
ago.
Yeah, he lived in Germany.
He's really has changed the story.
Yeah.
And now it's the enemy. And again, that's part of being a good dictator. You have to identify an enemy. Yeah. And I mean, I give you an analogy that some people won't like, but the analogy here is Hitler had the Jews, and now Putin has the Nazis.
Oh yeah, in Ukraine.
And in America now we have deplorables.
I agree with you.
So I mean, it's a repetition of the same sort of a phenomenon. We blame some other group, and they are the enemy. And if you can somehow control them, then you are going to have a better world and a better life in that world. And it's a very fallacious form of thinking. And
it's frightening. And as an amateur reader talking to a true historian, the winds of it, it's like, this doesn't end. Don't expect it to end. And each time somebody thinks we won't have to do it again, we're going to have to do it again. Yeah. What are you working on now? Yeah.
Well,
what are you working on now?
I'm working on 2 or 3 projects, one of which is a story of the role of Fort Ticonderoga, the early phases. A very important story, because keeping control of that Hudson Valley corridor up through to Montreal and Quebec are so very, very important so the British can't attack from behind. And Fort Ticonderoga plays a very important role. Then a second project I'm working on, it's almost close to being done, is a story of a missionary, American missionary, who located in Dagestan, right next to Chechnya. And that's the reason I know a lot about the Chechen story. And this is an amazing story because he is kidnapped. There's a lot of kidnapping going on. And it's a story of his survival over 231 days. And the memoir is very close to being, I'm working to put together the memoir of the missionary himself and their experiences. And then in turn, we've got a television documentary for that particular project. And then if I didn't have anything else to do, I'm working on another novel. This one.
Well, this is
Indians fighting in the Mohawk Valley and fighting cooperative with whites and so on and so forth.
One of my earlier books, I was gifted with the ability to read because I wasn't gifted with much else. I read Drums Along the Mohawk. I'm like 11. Oh,
that's the story. I just recently reread it. As a matter of fact, it's
wonderful.
Sanders. It's an amazing story. But it's a certain thing that was written for audiences in the 30s when we didn't have other forms of entertainment. Whereas I think with novels today, you really got to get, and that's what we tried to do in Surviving Dresden, get into the story and get it going.
Well, here I carried your book around, so here's what's happened to it.
I
just carried.
Wait a minute.
No. I got one of these.
I've got one right here.
We have your cover, but I wanted you to know how much I love this. When I really, I take jackets off of books because I take them to gyms with me and put them in the truck and read when I get a break. So this is what happened to your book.
Okay.
If you're a gift, I thank you. I mean, I didn't put the book down, and every once in a while, guys like you show up.
Well,
thanks for doing the shoot.
We can keep talking. I can even talk for a long time about Benedict Arnold and all my work on Benedict Arnold.
Let's do it next time. I promise.
Whatever you like.
You take care of yourself. Mark will be in touch. Jim, thank you very much. Be safe. Bye.